Hello and welcome to a new episode of the Retro Rankings podcast where, well, to be brutally honest with you, hopefully I can pump something out for you that is worthy of a listen today because I have been battling some kind of bug. I don't know what's going on, but a few weeks ago it started with like a stomach thing and I couldn't quite make it out of the house to do things. Had to kind of rest and get myself into a position where, before I get carried away about my health, let me tell you something. I am drinking today I will be popping it open, a Guinness Nitro cold brew coffee. Listen to that gurgle. So I'm drinking that, okay? It's so super smooth. The podcast itself, Retro Rankings. If you're new here, by the way, welcome, thank you. But we usually discuss top 7 of my personal rankings of anything video game related, mostly retro if possible. So that's what we're here for. And I usually start the top of the show with something still video game related, maybe a little story. But my story this time is my health lately. So going back to that, yeah. So I had kind of like a stomach thing. I was supposed to go to Summerfest one Saturday, and that never happened. And I needed to try to get better because then a few days later I was leaving for Fort Collins, Colorado for a business trip, and so I wanted to make sure that I was in tip-top shape for that. No sense in basically going on your first business trip with your brand new company and not feeling well. Also turns out the stomach bug was gone by the day before I left. However, then something new kicked in, this virus that's been going around, I guess. It's got some initials or something. I don't know, BTS, BTV. I don't know what. I have no clue what it is. I thought it was allergies when I was out there, which was really weird because usually my allergies, which are bad, usually tend to go away with the type of dry air that's in Colorado. I'm basically not allergic to being outside there. And I was having issues for like a couple of days. It kept on getting worse. Started getting a little bit of a cough. Eventually, the plane ride back was just absolutely horrid. It makes me scared of flying if even I have the littlest bit of sickness or something. Like I would hope that I am 110% the next time I have to get on a plane. It was bad. Like my ears filled up with fluid to the point where I went deaf for like a few minutes. They would not pop, like no matter how hard I tried. And it got so intense and so my head was so full of so much pressure that like I started getting like this like stinging sensation all across my face. It hurt. It was very uncomfortable. I felt like my head was going to explode, and I had to try to make it look like maybe if I just rub my head and maybe I just have like a little bit of a headache because I wanted to smack my face. I wanted to, like move my mouth up and down, to try to crack, make that crack happen that pops your ears and all this. Like I wanted to like just go fucking ape shit, but I couldn't because I'm on a plane. But yeah, it was bad. It was really bad. Eventually, they popped a little bit, enough to relieve some of that pressure that was building up, and it took probably about another 10 minutes to get to the point where, like, I was a little bit more comfortable, but they were still filled with fluid for days. So I took like 2 COVID tests the next day. They were both negative. I had the virus thing, like I said, and even like a week later at this point, I still feel like I got like some kind of like fluid in my chest, and I've been doing whatever I can to try to get rid of that. So that being said, I am still somewhat under the weather. I had to cancel basically plans twice in like 3 weeks. So I'm hoping to get through this rather quickly, this episode today, just because it does take a lot out of me to actually talk, but I still also wanted to get this episode pumped out. So, real quick, what's been going on in my world of video games? Well, I was playing Life is Strange True Colors. I got that new WarioWare game, which I bought particularly to play in the hotel room while had some downtime on the business trip. First WarioWare game I ever bought. Not my type of game. It's okay if you like the mini games, but I kind of feel like maybe it might be me. I don't know if playing this game for the first time I'm supposed to know what some of these clues are when you start the mini game, where it tells you like what you got to accomplish without really telling you what you have to do to accomplish that. I don't know if I'm supposed to be familiar with that. I don't know. But some things I found quite frustrating, where it would tell me what the goal was, the objective, and then I'm sitting there with a certain character, and I'm like, but I don't know what to do, so I'm just all over the screen mashing buttons and not accomplishing anything. Like, because then you have like 5, 7, 10 seconds or something to complete it. And some things were just plain as day. Oh yeah, I know what to do. And about half the characters I didn't like what they did. When it got to the point where I got to choose my crew to go through a stage, I selected them based upon what my preferences were. And sometimes that backfired. Sometimes that didn't work out. But anyway, not really I beat the thing in 3 nights or something like that, the story mode or whatever, 100%ed it. Didn't even try to 100% it. All of a sudden, like after the credits, it said I had like 60 of 60 of something. I don't even know what that is. I don't even know if I get that number right, but there was something of something, a certain number, and I had it, and I'm like, I didn't even know I was like trying to aim for something like that. So there's a whole bunch of other modes that I unlocked along the way, but I just don't care. Life is Strange True Colors. It's a good game. It's not bad. It's my first playing a game from that series. It's all right. For a story based game, it's okay. I wanted to try to get into one of the previous ones that I purchased. Never had time to play it. So Life is Strange True Colors. We just had the Nintendo Direct recently. Some surprises there for me. I expected the N64 to show up on the Nintendo Online service. It's kind of a surprise that Sega Genesis is showing up on there. There was also rumors of Game Boy Color, even maybe Game Boy Advance games showing up. That didn't happen, at least not yet. I'm kind of hoping that does. Because I have enough things around my house where I can play Nintendo, Super Nintendo, Genesis, Nintendo 64 without any issues. But I actually don't have like anything that I can really take on the go yet. And I would like to basically play those handheld games on the go again on my Switch. That would be really fantastic if they could pump those out on the online service. I kind of also feel that it'd be totally worth the money if they're going to be raising it to $30, $40. I don't know how much they're going to raise it to, but I'm not actually going to be playing a lot of the N64 Genesis stuff. I would probably play the hell out of handheld titles, though. The 3D Kirby game, wow, that kind of just came out of nowhere. I was kind of expecting Donkey Kong. I kind of, be honest with you, forgot about Kirby. I haven't even heard any kind of rumblings around Kirby. A new Kirby game, and it's 3D, open world, Kirby Odyssey, if you will. I'm actually really kind of excited for that. So, and Bayonetta 3. It's about fucking time. We saw some Bayonetta 3. I am totally so hyped for Bayo that both those games come out in 2022. So, as far as video games go, playing and excited for some things coming forward here. Let's get into today's episode, though. We are going to be talking about the top 7 Nintendo Entertainment System, or NES, co-op games. Now, just an asterisk on that. These are games that I have played. These aren't necessarily games that may or may not appear on top lists that you find. However, in comparison to some of the top lists, I will tell you that most of these do fall on other top lists as well. These are my opinions about the games. If you're welcome, of course, obviously, to shoot me an email, quotationrotation@gmail.com, if you want to have any kind of discussion about anything that I discuss in any of my episodes. So, again, these are up to me. That's what this podcast is all about. I'm just telling you what my thoughts and feelings are, why I rank things the way I rank things. So, there we go. You have it. Let's get right into it. Top 7 NES couch co-ops on today's episode of the Retro Rankings podcast. Bomberman 2. Bomberman 2 is a video game developed and published by Hudson Soft and released for both the Famicom and the NES back in 1991, June 28th in Japan, and the PAL was 1991. The NES was February 1993. The game was titled Dynablaster in Europe. As the story goes, Bomberman, named White Bomberman, is framed for a terrible crime committed by Black Bomberman. After being accused of robbing a bank, White Bomberman is thrown into jail. Bomberman's mission is to escape his prison cell and bring Black Bomberman to justice. Now, that is the story as it goes if you were playing one player. That's not what we're doing here. We're talking about the two-player aspects of these games. This is where my love for Bomberman started as well. Why Bomberman 2? Well, because it was the first Bomberman actually to introduce a versus mode. The first Bomberman didn't have that. It was a single-player game. The second Bomberman did, and going forward, I just absolutely loved it. It was, for me, the perfect game to play with friends as far as just partying and just having fun and trying to kick each other's asses. In and of itself, the game follows the classic Bomberman formula. Players control Bomberman, who is in a room full of blocks and enemies, and must plant bombs to destroy the blocks and enemies. Several blocks contain power-ups, such as a blast radius increaser and fuse shortener. And one in each level contains a door, which then Bomberman uses to proceed to the next level in the single-player campaign. As I said, new to the series is multiplayer modes. The versus mode is a 2-player mode, while battle mode is 3-player. The objective is to kill your opposing Bomberman by planting bombs. In order to play the 3-player mode, you needed the NES 4-score adapter. What more can I say about Bomberman? Not a whole lot. I mean, everybody knows Bomberman, and it's quite simple. You go around, you plant bombs, try to break the bricks, and get to your other opponent. You get the power-ups, planting more bombs, increasing your blast radius, and as the series progressed, you got more and more power-ups as well to kind of aid you in your quest in defeating your friends, or in this case, they become your foes. But Bomberman 2 is where it all started. Did I own this game? No, I didn't own this game. Actually, I had a friend that owned this game. I had a friend that was all about Hudson games. He had like all the Hudson games. It was like the weirdest thing like ever. I don't know anybody that like back then ever collected all of one publisher's games. Like, oh, let's go to so and so's house because he's got all the Konami games. Like that wasn't like a thing. But for some reason, I don't know if it was like an Adventure Island thing that he just loved that Hudson Bee and everything that was on, the Hudson Bee appeared on a package or something. He had to have that game. But yeah, my friend Rick had this game, Bomberman 2, and that's where it all started. And then when Super Bomberman came around a few years later, that I had to go get. And I've been playing Bomberman ever since, especially with friends. I do play single player campaigns in some of the games. They're just not as fun to me, to be honest with you. I really enjoy Bomberman playing with friends. That's where it's at, and that's where it started with Bomberman 2, and that is number 7 on my list of NES couch co-ops today.
6.
Double Dragon 2: The Revenge. Double Dragon 2: The Revenge is a side-scrolling beat-em-up produced by Technos Japan, originally released as a coin-operated arcade game in 1988. It is the first sequel to Double Dragon, released during the previous year. The sequel involves Billy and Jimmy Lee in a mission to avenge Billy's girlfriend Marion after she is shot to death by Black Warrior leader Willie, who is retaliating against the Lee brothers after his defeat at the end of the previous game. Double Dragon 2 was initially developed as an upgrade kit to the original Double Dragon, but evolved into a standalone game due to an increase in memory size, resulting in developers reusing assets for both games. The arcade version of Double Dragon 2, The Revenge, begins with Marion from the original Double Dragon being shot to death by Willie. Once again, the players assume the roles of Billy and Jimmy Lee. They're now tasked to avenge Marion's death. As far as the arcade game goes, in my opinion, Double Dragon 2 is probably the best Double Dragon arcade game ever released. That can be said also as well for the release for the Nintendo. If you ever played the Mega Drive version is a straight port of the arcade game, featuring the same stages and weapons and everything, as well as almost every enemy character, with Jeff being the lone omission. The only significant change to the level design was in Mission 2, which was substantially changing in order to make it a longer and more complex stage. However, the characters were redesigned to much smaller proportions and are less colorful than the ones featured in the original arcade version, or even the Genesis port of the Double Dragon by Accolade, released a year later in North America and Europe. So now you gotta talk about the choice of a difficulty setting. So to start the game, you had 3 difficulty settings, where it restricted the game's length based on which difficulty level you choose. The easy and medium settings in the game after like 3 and 8 stages respectively, while the 9th and final stage can only be reached if you select the hardest setting. The difficulty levels are also balanced differently in the Famicom version, if you will, with the platforming sessions in Mission 6 being easier on the easy and normal setting than they were on the equivalent settings here on the NES version, while enemies have more health on the hardest setting. The NES version also requires the player to input a cheat code at the game over screen to continue the game at the previous stage. So not only were there the subtle differences, those subtle differences from the arcade to the NES, but the NES and the Famicom also had differences as well. I could get into the PC Engine version of it, which I also recently played. But unlike the first NES game, Double Dragon 2 can be played with the 2 players simultaneously, which is why this is on my list. A lot of people probably think back and think, oh yeah, I remember playing, 2-player Double Dragon on the Nintendo, and no, you didn't. That was probably Double Dragon 2. So but Double Dragon and Double Dragon 2 is a better game than Double Dragon overall, in its story, in its gameplay, in its graphics, even. Just it's got a little bit more colors popping in it and everything. But people just Double Dragon. People just think Double Dragon. Double Dragon's there. The red box art. When you think Double Dragon, you think of the first one, and people think of playing the first one, and it's like It's like the misremembering type of thing, where it's like, oh yeah, I remember playing Double Dragon with my friends. We'd sit there and we'd accidentally hit each other. Well, that didn't happen. That was the second one, with the two modes of play, which differ only in whether or not the two players can hurt each other with their attacks. That's the thing. You could select that as well. So that was Double Dragon 2, everybody. So in case like you're my age and you're like misremembering that, it was Double Dragon 2. It wasn't the first one. And the structure of the game is completely different as well. The first stage loosely resembles the one from the arcade version. The level designs deviate completely from Mission 2 onward, by the way. So kind of a complete deviation. The NES version kind of became its own thing, which was also very interesting. There are a total of 9 stages in the NES version, and before each stage there's a cutscene that's showing, consisting of still imagery and text, which provide the setting of the stage. Overall, as far as a side-scrolling beat 'em up goes, in Double Dragon, that's 2. Double Dragon 2 is where it's at, and that's why it's number 6 on my list. So I'm not going to lie. I'm having a lot of trouble kind of recording this episode. It's kind of pre-editing. It's all over the place. The other thing that I've been trying to kick is the fact that I've been absolutely lethargic lately, just absolutely tired from this buildup, this like pressure in my chest, and the coughing it out and the difficulty breathing. It's almost like pneumonia or something, probably. I don't know. I should probably go back to the doctor, to the clinic, and get that checked out. But yeah, it's really hard to concentrate. But so in the editing, if something seems choppy or jumpy, it's because I probably rambled, and I've been doing a lot of rambling that you'll probably never hear, and I've been having to cut it out and really get back to what I'm trying to talk about. So, let's get back right into this list.
5.
Tetris. Now, keep in mind, this is like another misremembering thing. You could think about like how Tetris, and everybody knows Tetris, right? I mean, you've got to know Tetris. It's like the number one puzzle game, like, of all time. You're probably sitting there thinking like, I remember playing against my friends, Tetris against my friends, right? And you're probably thinking of the Nintendo version of Tetris with that blue box, and the bricks are kind of like coming at you towards the bottom. They get a little bit bigger on the box. That Tetris version did not have 2-player simultaneous. You got to get to the unofficial Nintendo Tengen version of Tetris, the quote-unquote Soviet mind game version of Tetris, in order to get the 2-player version. I never had this version. I had the NES version, and but this version, this was developed by Tengen. It was developed by Atari Games, and that's what this version comes from. It is a port under their home console label, Tengen, like I said, for the NES, despite it not being licensed by Nintendo for the system. There were issues with the publishing rights. After much wrangling, Nintendo itself ended up with the rights to publish the console versions, leaving Atari with only the rights to the arcade versions. As a result, the Tengen game was only on the shelf for like 4 weeks before Atari was legally required to recall the game and destroy any remaining inventory of that NES version. I knew somebody that had this. I didn't have it. I had no choice but to have the other version because I couldn't get this. But I knew somebody that had it, It had like a gold box with like that, like a Russian building. I'm not good with what buildings are called in other countries, but it had like a Russian building on it, and it had like a gold box. That much I remember. And I remember the music was not as good as both the NES and the Game Boy versions of Tetris. I probably played the hell out of the single player version of the Game Boy than the NES. But yeah, my friend Kyle had the Tengen version of Tetris. And if my memory serves me correctly, he was the only person that had it. It came out in like May of '89, so it was gone like that summer. I don't know if that meant, I don't know how things were back then. I don't know if that meant like they were like literally recalled, like retailers were told to pull them off the shelves, or if they just stopped manufacturing and people sold through their copies. But if you wanted to play two-player Tetris, like Kyle's house was the place to go for two-player Tetris. And it's because of Tetris that playing two-player puzzle games like that, anytime a new game came out, whether that was Dr. Mario, Yoshi's Cookie, Wario's Woods, the bubble blasting games. I don't know what those are called. They're Busta Move with the Bubble Bobble people, Bubble Bobble characters. All those Busta Move, like anything where it was like side by side screens where you're playing with something like. It started with Tetris. It started with the two-player Tetris. It started with the Tengen Atari version of Tetris. And so it's thanks to that got me into, and that's, I mean, talking about Bomberman too. I kind of liken that to like a puzzle game. I mean, because it's based on a lot on strategy and how you're going to defeat the person you're playing against on the same screen. I kind of feel that like with Tetris is like one of the most satisfying puzzle games ever. You know, you're building towards obtaining all these points by building perfect stacks of blocks and then getting a Tetris, which is you slide that last piece down, however you get it, all across the screen, 4 levels of blocks gets you your Tetris. So to be that perfect at the same time that you're trying to kick somebody else's ass and trying to bring them down and get extra blocks on their screen so that they can get a game over before you do. It was just so extra satisfying. So extra satisfying. There's not much more I can say about Tetris. Actually, if you want like a real good deep dive into the history of Tetris, go over to Gaming Historian. He put together a couple years ago like a real intense deep dive on Tetris. Other than that, you all should know Tetris. You all play Tetris. I'm sure you've all played some kind of semblance of Tetris against somebody else. You know how it is. It's one of the greatest puzzle games ever made. It's also one of the greatest puzzle games you can play against somebody of all time. Tetris, number 5 on my list today. 4. River City Ransom. River City Ransom is an open-world, action, role-playing beat-em-up video game originally for the NES. It was developed by Technos Japan, we've heard this name before, and originally released in Japan on April 25th, 1989. It is the third game in Technos' Kunio-kun series, released for the console, preceded by Renegade and Super Dodgeball. Like its predecessors, River City Ransom underwent great changes in its storyline and graphical presentation during its localization in order to make the game more palatable in the Western market. It was one of the first console games published by North American subsidiary American Technos. River City Ransom. It's like taking Double Dragon and adding some kind of RPG elements to it, if you will. Let me talk about the plot real quick, as far as, because in these type of games, the plot's the same whether you're one player or two player. It follows high school students Alex and Ryan as they cross River City in an attempt to reach River City High and rescue Ryan's girlfriend Cindy from the clutches of a villain called Slick. Along the way, they battle with gangs of students with names such as the generic dudes, the frat guys, the jocks, or the squids, and several gang leaders which act as bosses or sub-bosses. Like I said, it's a beat-em-up with some RPG elements. It's non-linear, allowing the players to explore in an open world. That's one of the bigger differences from Double Dragon in a sandbox-like manner. The fighting style is similar to Double Dragon, though, however, in that the player can move freely around the screen while pressing buttons to punch, kick, or jump. Objects such as brass knuckles, steel pipes, and trash cans can be used as melee weapons or thrown at enemies. However, the character's effectiveness in battle is determined by several statistics and their knowledge of fighting techniques such as Grand Slam, Stone Hands, and Dragon Feet, which are purchased as books in shops throughout the city, using funds recovered from defeated gang members. That's part of the RPG element of it as well. The loot can also be spent on various food items and spot treatments, which serve to not only revitalize your status, but also increase your attributes like punch and kick. So there's your RPG elements of it. It's basically, and that was one of the fun things about playing with a friend, River City Ransom, is that it's like you're playing Double Dragon, but kind of on steroids with the extra added RPG elements of the game. And you guys could probably, if you've played this, know what I'm talking about here when I say you sit there with your friend and you can talk about, like, oh, what should I be spending my money on? Like, you weren't making those decisions by yourself, which was great, which is why this is a little higher than Double Dragon 2. Playing River City Ransom with somebody else simultaneously on the couch, or in our case, crisscross applesauce on the living room floor, as most video games are played when I was a child. It was good to be able to kind of be like, oh, where should we go? Or like, you really kind of just had more open dialogue with your friend. You weren't just sitting there going from left to right, kicking and punching enemies, and being done with it. There was decisions that had to be made, and your friend helped you out with that. And that's why I think that River City Ransom, as far as a two-player co-op game, is a lot better than, well, really any other side-scrolling beat-em-up game ever released for the NES. The fighting mechanics seemed overall better as well. I just think that Double Dragon 2 and Double Dragon itself as a series just has a bigger and better legacy than River City Ransom. It's kind of like a cult classic, if you will, in that it's got its fan base, it's got its close followers. They appreciate it. They appreciate the fact that it's got depth and it's replayable, and it's deep and it's engaging, and it's in those ways, because of the RPG elements, it just makes it a better game than Double Dragon ever was. But I still think, as I said, I think those elements apply better when you're playing with somebody else, because, like I said, you can talk it through. You can make decisions with somebody else, and it kind of brought a way together to both side-scroll, beat 'em up, kick and punch, beat the shit out of people, right? And still be able to like talk to your friend and like make decisions that really affected how you were playing. And that's why River City Ransom is number 4 on my list today. All right, getting into the top 3 here. I need to take another drink. And this is a tall can. I'm going to get through this can. Well before the episode's even over. All right, so moving right along here.
3.
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, the arcade game. This was like all over the list because this also too was kind of nostalgic heavy with my history of loving the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and the video games except for the original NES. That one can go fuck itself. Pretty much I've played every other game. I've played the beat 'em up games. I've played the fighting games. I just love the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. So this for like a hot minute was in like my number 1, then it was in my number 2, then it was at like number 5, and eventually I moved it to number 3. The list has been all over, but I think having this somewhat in the middle, I would say in the middle of a top 5 in this case, I think it's perfectly placed. But before I get to why I think that it is, let's talk about the game itself. It was originally an arcade game, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, released by Konami in 1989. Of course, it's based on this franchise of the same name, including the first animated series that began airing just 2 years earlier. In the game, up to 4 players control the titular turtles, fighting through various levels to defeat the turtles' enemies, including the Shredder, Krang, and the Foot Clan. Released during a high point in popularity for the Ninja Turtles franchise, the arcade game was a worldwide hit, becoming the highest grossing dedicated arcade game of 1990 in the United States. Versions for the various home systems followed, including the NES, which is what we're here to talk about, and a sequel, Turtles in Time, in 1991. Let's talk about the NES version real quick. That port came to the NES also in 1990. The conversion was titled Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, the arcade game, in order to avoid confusion with the previous NES game based on the franchise, which I said can go fuck itself. The Famicom version was titled Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles without a number or a subtitle due to the fact that the NES game was localized in Japan under a different title, so it didn't matter. This version included 2 new levels. The first part of Scene 3 and all of Scene 6, which featured new enemy characters, including 2 new bosses created specifically for the NES port. Tora, who was like a polar bear, and Shogun, who was a robotic samurai. Most of the original stages from the arcade version were extended as well, and the second half of Scene 3, the parking garage stage, replaces the arcade version's end battle with Bebop and Rocksteady, with a battle against the mutated fly form of Baxter Stockman. The NES port appeared in Nintendo's PlayChoice 10 arcade system, and it went on to be re-released as well for other systems, including like the Wii Virtual Console. Eventually that got canceled. And there was notable product placement in the NES version for Pizza Hut. There's Pizza Hut logos like all over the place, and even the instruction book that had a coupon, which I never used because I didn't like destroying shit when I was a kid. So never used the Pizza Hut coupon. I remember specifically saying, I'm not using this coupon. Like, why would I want to cut out a coupon out of my instruction book, right? Doesn't matter. I don't even have it anymore. I guess I could have used it. Given the fact that we all know this game, we all know that this was the game you went to your arcade with your friends with to go play and have some fun and pump some quarters in that son of a bitch. And really, quite honestly, it was probably one of the first arcade games where a friend of mine and I would go with a roll of quarters each just to get to the end of the game. To be able to play it at home after that disastrous first Ninja Turtles game, to be able to play 2 players was just fantastic. I don't know what else I can tell you. It's the epitome of side-scrolling beat-em-ups. It's so much better. Maybe because it's Ninja Turtles. Maybe it's because it's Konami. But it's so much better than the other entries on my list. So much better than Double Dragon. So much better than River City Ransom. It's fucking Ninja Turtles. It's the fucking arcade game. And getting together and kicking some ass with your friends, there was nothing like it back then. It was freaking great. And Turtles in Time also, another great entry. Still can't wait for that brand new Ninja Turtles game coming out. That's kind of gonna revisit that past passion of the early 90s, playing these Ninja Turtle arcade games and going from side to side, beating the shit out of, the Foot Clan. It's a great game, and The NES version gave you, in order to give you a little bit more, because obviously the graphics were downgraded substantially, by the way. It still looks really good for a Nintendo game. I mean, you're talking it was 1990 at this point. They were really starting to kick up the graphics a little bit. They were really starting to go all in with the graphics. So even though it's a downgrade from the arcade version, it still looks pretty good. And to make up for the fact that they had downgraded, you got some extra content out of it. You got some longer levels. I mean, who could complain? Don't if you've never played the NES version, even in a solo campaign, because you played the arcade version, like, you're missing out. You need to play TMNT 2, the arcade game for the Nintendo. It should be one that does not go unlooked. In fact, you know what? I think I didn't play through from beginning to end all these games recently. I just dabbled in the first, couple levels just to get reacquainted again and bring back the memories of me playing 2-player with some of my friends growing up. I'm going to replay this and get through to the end of it. But yeah, I don't know what else to tell you. TMNT 2, the arcade game, one of the best side-scrolling beat-em-ups ever released for the Nintendo. Go out there, if you haven't played it, load up your ROM or whatever you're doing with your Nintendo stuff and play it, even by yourself. But it's even more fun with a friend. TMNT 2, the arcade game, number 3 on my list of NES couch co-ops today. All right, 2 more to go, and it's getting harder for me actually to talk. I'm not big on quality anyway. That's all I do on these podcasts is just talk and talk and talk and talk and talk. Whatever comes out of my mouth is what you hear. Except if I talk too much, a lot of it ends up on the cutting room floor, which is happening today. And I should have kept it clean and concise because my chest is killing me and I'm getting more tired as I actually go along. So I'm going to whip through the last 2. And I apologize. The next episode is episode 10. And the next 2 episodes in October, by the way, are going to be Halloween themed. So episode 10, like I said, every 10th episode is going to kind of be like story time. You're going to learn a little bit more about me. I'm going to be telling some ghost stuff, personal paranormal history type stuff. And then episode 11, which is the second episode of October, is going to be a horror movie ranking episode, which you'll learn about a little bit later. I'm going to have a guest on for that. So hopefully I'll be fine by the time it comes to record those episodes, because I'd hate to not have to record those episodes. I'm looking forward to recording those 2. But let's get into the last 2 here.
2.
Contra. Contra is a run-and-gun shooter video game developed and published by Konami, originally developed as a coin-operated arcade game in 1986 and released on February 20th, 1987. The home version was released for the NES in 1988, along with ports for various home computer formats, including the MSX2. The arcade and computer versions were localized by Grisor in Europe, and the NES version as Probotector in PAL regions. Probotector. It's kind of an easy word, but still hard to say, probably because there's too many O's and R's. Probotector. Probotector. The arcade game was a commercial success worldwide, becoming one of the top 4 highest-grossing dedicated arcade games of 1987 in the U.S. The NES version was also critical and commercial success, with EGM awarding it the best action game of 1988. And of course, we've been having sequels ever since. Some of the more recent ones, not so good because Konami has kind of dropped the ball on their big IPs lately. Like I said, it was released in 1988 in February. Of course, it was produced in-house by Konami, featured several differences from the arcade version in order to better suit the NES's hardware. For example, sprites and explosions, for example, are shown in 30 frames per second instead of 60 to work around the sprite limitations of the system. Another game to use this technique is Rekka. The Famicom version contains cutscenes and additional music than the NES did, but oh well. That's just how it always is between NES and Famicoms. There's always differences in their games. So as far as the two players go, due to graphical limitations of the NES, Bill and Lance lost their individualized character designs, and instead they were both just depicted as shirtless commandos, distinguished by the colors of their pants, in this case, red or blue. Blue was the first player, red was the second. And when one player loses all of their lives, they are given the option to use the other player's stock to keep fighting. The power-up icons for the machine gun and laser gun were also changed, and now represented by letter-based Falcon symbols, M and L, and were used as other weapons, by the way. The rapid bullets and barrier power-ups were also more common in this version, since unlike the arcade game, the flying item cancels now appear regardless of which weapon the player character currently possesses. The NES version also introduces a seventh item that clears the screen of all on-screen enemies when obtained, which is super fucking fantastic. Too bad it doesn't happen more often. I could keep on going deeper into the differences between the arcade and the NES. That's not what we're here to talk about. I already basically said what was important is that the character sprites were so dumbed down for this version from the arcade version that when you're playing one or two players, you're basically the same guy wearing two different colored pants, which is fine. It gets the job done. The reason why, even though I said TMNT 2, the arcade game, is probably one of the best side-scrolling beat-em-ups on the Nintendo, even though could be considered a side-scrolling beat-em-up, not every single stage is side-scrolling. And number two, it's harder. It is a lot harder of a game than TMNT 2 is, and therefore you appreciate the fact that you can play with somebody at the same time a lot more than in TMNT 2. And it's fucking Contra. I mean, it was probably one of the most mainstream games to have aliens in it of the time. It made you feel like you're both Arnold Schwarzenegger in Commando and Ripley in Aliens or something. Like, it was like the best of both worlds. It's like run and gun, but with aliens, you know? And there was something to be said about that and how exciting it was to just blast the shit out of sometimes some of these massive alien bosses. You're talking about like the boss stage in stage 3. I mean, it was a door with a giant alien on top of it, for example. And as trying as it was, as a one player, you could play with two players and try to be kind of... You can try to go in with a little bit more of a better game plan with two players, so you fail your objective, whatever level that may be. And you die, and then you sit there and you pause it, and you say, okay, I'm going to, like in this level, I'm going to take the top, you take the bottom, or I'm going to take the left, you take the right, and we're going to stand in these particular spots and try to avoid, you know, you're yelling at your friends, like, try to avoid this and try to avoid that, like, you know, like, it's constant coaching in Contra, two players. You're constantly coaching one another. At least you hope that you have two people smart enough to coach one another. Otherwise, you're going to have one guy constantly telling his other friend what to do, you know, and then he's kind of like becoming the boss of the game. And then he goes around school and be like, yeah, I played Contra with Paul and he was bossy. Well, you know, I guess maybe you're just dumb and you got to be told what to do. I don't know. I'm just saying. But that's like what type of game Contra brought out to me and my friends. That's what it brought out. That's what it brought out in us. Is that kind of level of excitement. And I'll tell you though, too, like it also brought out a lot of frustrations. You couldn't get through the game, brought out a lot of frustrations. That's what's so good about that Konami code. And it was, not gonna lie, it was one of those games that once that Game Genie came out, it wasn't one of those games. It was one of those games that got plugged into the Game Genie so that we could finally beat it. I don't remember ever beating it legitimately with somebody at all the first time. I think it was with a Game Genie, I'm pretty sure. But anyway, everybody knows Contra. Everybody should know all these games. Maybe not River City Ransom, maybe not Bomberman 2. But you should know all these games and how much fun they are to play with 2 players, especially Contra. It's a classic. It was definitely a lot better to play this with 2 players at home than for some kids to be pumping quarters. Because you could, like I said, you can go to play the Ninja Turtles arcade game, pump some quarters in with 2 players. You probably get through the end before you reach an end of a roll of quarters. But Contra was a whole different beast. And it was finally really nice to see a home port of Contra and to be able to sit there and play with your friends and just strategize and yell at each other and tell each other what to do. And that's what made playing 2 players with Contra so fantastic. So Contra, number 2 on my list of NES couch co-ops today. I'm almost done with my Guinness Nitro Cold Brew coffee. The one complaint I have is it feels like it gets a little warm after a short amount of time. Maybe it loses that. It's still smooth, but it loses a little something. It loses a little something after a while. So this is it.
Yeah! Jesus fucking Christ, it's about time! One.
Bobble. Bobble is a 1986 platform arcade game published and developed by Taito. It was distributed in the US by Romstar and in Europe by Electrocoin. Players control Bub and Bob, 2 dragons that set out to save their girlfriends from a world known as the Cave of Monsters. In each level, Bub and Bob must defeat each enemy present by trapping them in bubbles and popping them, who in turn turns them into bonus items when they hit the ground. There are 100 levels in total, each becoming progressively more difficult. In the game's plot itself, if you will, Baron von Blubba has kidnapped the brothers Bubby and Bobby's girlfriend, or Bub and Bob, and turned them, the brothers, into bubble dragons, which is why later in the Bubble series you actually see them as actual human characters, by the way, in case you didn't know. Bub and Bob have to finish the 100 levels in order to rescue them. Each player controls one of the 2 dragons. Players can move along platforms, fall to lower ones, jump to higher ones, over gaps. Each level is a single screen with no left and right scrolling. It's just, stale and stagnant. It is static. It doesn't move. If a screen does have gaps in its bottom edge, players can fall through these and reappear at the top. Each level has a certain number of enemies that must be defeated in order to advance. The players must blow the bubbles, trap the enemies, and burst them by colliding into them. Each enemy then is defeated in this manner will turn into, like I said, a bonus item or a food item that can be picked up for extra points. Defeating multiple enemies at once awards higher scores, causes more valuable food items to drop. All bubbles will float for a certain length of time before busting open on their own. Players can jump on these and ride them to otherwise inaccessible areas. Magic items appear also from time to time to grant special abilities and advantages when picked up. Special bubbles occasionally appear that can be burst to attack enemies with fire, water, or lightning. Furthermore, if a player collects letters, they're like letter bubbles, to spell the word extend, a bonus life is earned, and both players immediately advance to the next level. It's a simple game. Pretty much, I could keep going into more details, more history of the game. That's not why really we're here. I'm here to tell you why I think playing 2 players is good for a game and why this one is best on my list. It's because it's fucking fun. It's so simple in its premise. You have a single stage. It's there. It's on the screen. It doesn't move. You go around the screen. You blow bubbles at the enemies. You run into them. You pick up items. You clear the screen. You keep going. Right? Simple. It does get progressively harder. It does. There are times where it gets frustrating. And it's because it's more simplistic than just your run-of-the-mill side-scrolling beat-em-up, but yet still it's kind of got the same type of feeling that you've got playing a Bomberman 2 and a Tetris, only that instead of trying to kill your partner, you're working with your partner. You're working to achieve something that seems simplistic but can be very trying at times. So really, the number one reason why this is number one on my list is because you really are truly doing a co-op here. Bomberman 2 and Tetris really aren't co-ops. You're not working together to achieve something. You're battling one another. But the whole point of a couch co-op is going to go two ways. Couch co-op means you're playing both simultaneously. You're playing both at the same time. You're both on the screen at once. It's not like playing Mario Brothers where you're taking turns. Okay? So, even though I used the word co-op, it's used loosely, obviously, if you haven't figured that out by now. But this is really, truly a co-op game. Like your Ninja Turtles 2, like your Double Dragon 2, like your River City Ransom, for example. But it's just so simplistic. It's a puzzle game. It's, and I kind of am partial to puzzle games. I love puzzle games. I think that they both get the brain working. They're not just, the mashing the buttons, going from left to right, beating somebody up. I like having my brain exercised. I like having to exercise my brain with somebody else, which is why I kind of like working with somebody on Contra, because you have to try to kind of plan ahead. You kind of have to try to, have a game plan going into that game, and whatever's not working, you have to cooperate. And that's kind of like the same here, but this is a lot more fun, and it's colorful, and it's Bubble Bobble. It's fucking Bubble Bobble. It's not obviously the best NES game. I think it's just the best game that you play with somebody else. If you've never played Bubble Bobble with somebody, I mean, you're missing out. I don't know how you can't not have played two-player Bubble Bobble with somebody. I did not own this game. I actually went to a friend's house, and I don't remember who that friend's name was at this point. He wasn't really a close friend of mine. He was like a friend of a friend, and I went to his house, and he had Bubble Bobble, and I kind of fell in love with Bubble Bobble. And started playing its sequels. God, there's like 20 fucking sequels to this game, not including the spin-off Bust-A-Move games. But yeah, it's a great two-player game. It's fun, and I don't know what else to tell you. I don't want to tell you anything else. I'm actually really hurting right now. And I actually have plans tonight, rescheduled plans. I need to keep them. So I think I need to take a rest. Bubble Bobble. It is the ultimate two-player co-op game on the NES. You can email me and argue that all you want, but that's what we're going with. Bubble Bobble, number one on my list today. All right. Well, I wanted to get something out, even if this episode ended up being a little bit of a mess. I like to keep my promises. But, yeah. Oh, before we go, we got to do a Porta-Rota Players Pro Tip of the Day.
Oh, yeah.
Porta-Rota's Player Pro Tip of the Day, I already mentioned it. How about that? I'm just going to keep it quite simple. The Konami code, Contra, up, down, left, right, BA, start. Get you a little bit farther in the game if you didn't know. Legitimate pro tip. There we go. That's it. Can be done with it. If you have any problems with my list, like I said, you can email me, petitionrotation@gmail.com. I don't check it as often as I should. I probably should have checked my emails before I started this episode in case I got an email about a previous one, but I probably should have checked it. I'm going to admit I dropped the ball on that one. Just not with it today.
Complicated fellow, isn't he?
Quotationrotation.com. That's where you can find everything. The YouTube links, the most recent episode of the podcast. In case you're not privy, the podcast can also be found probably anywhere else podcasts are found, in addition to where you're listening to it right now. If you hear that, there's a plane going by. We've got some really weird shit that goes on out here. I saw a guy in a chair flying above my house one day. It was weird. I don't think I've ever seen that in real life. Somebody in a chair. It had a propeller in the back of the chair. Anyway, so that could be what that is. I don't know. like I said, next month, October, Halloween, episode 10 is going to be a storytime episode. I'm going to tell a little bit of some ghost stories. Maybe some that you may have heard way back in the day on my YouTube channel. But if not, hopefully you'll enjoy those. And the 11th episode will be ranking some Halloween movies. Literally Halloween movies. I'm going to have a guest on for that as well. But that's going to do it. I don't know what else to tell you. I need to go take like a 2-hour nap now to recover from this. That's how like really bad things are with me right now. Top 7 NES couch co-ops. Yeah, that's going to do it. I'll see you guys next time. Later.